A lot of organizations appoint a chief AI officer. That's great, but you're also then just putting it off to the side, aren't you? You're then delegating it to one role that is a separate role to your business. But you do need to become extremely good at working with AI. You do need to start treating it as a colleague whose strengths and weaknesses you understand, and where and how to engage that colleague. We're seeing that many roles are being fundamentally redesigned, and entirely new roles and industries are emerging. A lot of people that are talking about AI are looking about the business impact and the business applications of AI. And I think there's a huge amount of potential in terms of the social applications of AI and how do we leverage AI capabilities to drive societal benefit. AI is great at getting stuff done, but it can't create the experience of the world that we want to have. That's up to us, and that's up to our creativity.
All right, welcome back everyone to a new episode of Business Unbound, the show where we dive into conversations with visionary leaders from every corner of the globe to bring you insights, inspiration, and the real stories behind success. I'm your host, Florian Hof. Today, I'm joined by Amelia Green. Amelia is an executive leader in AI and digital infrastructure with over 25 years of experience driving digital transformation for Fortune 500 companies and governments across every major industry. Amelia is the founder of UBI, an AI and data infrastructure platform. But before starting her own company, Amelia was a partner and managing director, as well as a leader of AI and data at AlixPartners, one of the world's leading global consulting firms. She also previously served as Chief Digital Officer at PwC in Singapore. And during her career, she's built AI and machine learning platforms for leading social media companies, led over 200 business innovation engagements globally, and has been instrumental in helping organizations unlock over $4.2 billion in value through data and AI. For her work, Amelia was recognized with awards such as the Women Leaders in Technologies and named to the CIO 50 list. Today's conversation couldn't be more timely. Artificial intelligence has moved decisively from boardroom buzzword to business-critical infrastructure. Organizations are no longer asking whether to adopt AI. They are grappling with how to scale it, how to embed it into operations, and how to manage its profound impact on their workforce. At the same time, as we know, professionals across every industry are facing urgent questions about how their roles will evolve and what they need to do to stay relevant. In today's conversation, Amelia and I will explore the state of AI adoption globally, unpack the frameworks and strategies businesses need to successfully embed AI in digital infrastructure at scale, and examine how the future of jobs is being reshaped right now. So without further ado, this is Business Unbound. Let's dive in. Quick moment of honesty. Business Unbound is brand new. We are in the early days of something that I genuinely believe in, a show dedicated to real conversations with forward-thinking business leaders and inspiring individuals who are having a real impact on this world. And that's where you come in. I need your help. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app, please follow the show and leave a rating. It sounds simple, but it shows the algorithms that this content matters, and it directly impacts how many ambitious professionals like you discover these conversations. When you're helping me, you're not just supporting the show. Here's what you're really doing. You're saying that quality business conversations deserve a platform. You're saying substance matters over hype, and you're saying this mission is worth building. So if this resonates with you, help me reach others like you. Subscribe, follow, and share whatever works for wherever you are. You're helping me build something substantial from the ground up, and I genuinely appreciate it. So thank you. And now back to the show. Amelia Green, welcome to Business Unbound.
Thank you, Florian.
Amelia, let's start with your journey and perhaps with your own words. How would you explain to someone what you're doing right now?
What I'm doing right now? What I'm doing right now is I'm building a data monetization platform that gives back the value of data to the people who create it while creating benefits and EBITDA uplift for businesses, as well as societal benefits for governments and economies. So it's built really on my experience of building AI and data insights for companies and organizations throughout my career.
Well, and perhaps for our audience in more simple terms, how would you explain someone who is not in this field of AI and technology, what it actually is that your company is doing practically?
Every day when you walk down the street, whether you're on your phone or you're wearing a Fitbit or on any device, you are shedding tons of data about who you are, what you're doing, where you're going, your preferences. And at that moment, that data is being harvested by companies to personally market to you, to drive, their R&D, et cetera. And one of the things that I noticed when I was building these consumer data platforms for these organizations is that there was always one person missing from the balance sheet of that. It was who is creating the data. Each of the citizens, us, that are creating the data are getting very limited value from the data that we are sharing. It is a huge industry, $3.6 trillion. And I think it's fair that we should get some value from the data that we're sharing. So I am enabling citizens to be able to directly gather some income to support themselves from the data that they are creating and shedding on a daily basis through their daily lives.
Well, that certainly sounds interesting. At least for me, it is an interesting endeavor that you're working on. And you've obviously not always been in this space. So can I just ask, if you go a little bit back in time, what drew you to this intersection of technology, data, and business transformation in the first place?
At the heart of it is curiosity. I've always looked at common things in uncommon ways. I've spent my life being distinctly annoyed by a lot of what I see because it seems clunky. Why do we do it this way? There should be a better way of doing things, or services are delivered more coherently or cohesively, or things should operate better. So I've always been obsessed with new opportunities and better ways to provide value to get things done and those messy business problems. And when I started out, I was really fortunate to have the opportunity to work in the War Crimes Tribunal, which really taught me about the integrity of data. That was my first exposure to how important data is. Then from there, I went on to drive change and a global change management program as part of the leadership and performance team in Shell. And this really made me marvel at why big organizations and organizations move slowly. Why does this value get trapped into these silos? And so, because as an organization, you have what you want to provide to your customers, you have the experience that you want to provide, the product, the value, whatever it is. But then we build up all of these layers and all of that complexity. And within there, we're not leveraging the data that would enable us to keep laser focused on the value that we're providing and providing that in a way that is efficient, organized, and streamlined. Never made much sense to me. And at that point, the dot-com bubble started, and I saw this wonderful world of possibilities that these new capabilities gave us through digital, e-commerce, internet, all the rest of it in that day, to be able to drive new value in new ways and to create new things. So is that really then that I started working with organizations across industries and globally to define and implement the digital transformations that integrate two aspects, which I was fortunate enough to have learned in my experience by then, which is the hard side, the business process change that needs to happen to wire digital transformation into the organizations, and then de-risk it with the harder side, which is really about the behavioral and human change that's needed to make these changes operational. Because you need both of the sides of the coin. You can't slap in a business process change and expect humans and people using it to adopt it. How do you manage that transition? So very early on, I guess you could say, I saw that data was really the closest thing to an X-ray of an organization that you could get. So when you can clearly see what is happening in an organization across customers, operations, finance, then you know the levers that you can pull to change it. So for me, AI, data, digital was always the natural next step in terms of the capabilities, not just to see, but then to be able to gain insight, knowledge, predict, and then automate the actions that allow us to stay laser sharp on that value. So it's really about the combination of those three things. The technology, it became effective enough and mature enough to really matter. The business imperative, also to grow and become more efficient. And then the human side of how do we make this work and how do we integrate that into the businesses which are run by humans and operated by humans to make it effective.
And in this taxonomy, business, technology, and human, would AI and data sit in the technology bucket?
I would say it's in the business imperative bucket at the moment.
Interesting.
I think in the past, digital has been a technology to leverage. And you can leverage technology. And so, for example, if you think back to the good old days of RPA, okay, so we have a distinct process. We're going to automate that process. That's a technology-enabled process. So then I would call that a technology-enabled process. The difference that I see with AI and data is that it is disrupting the business that you do, not only the business that you are doing. So it's so it has the opportunity to disrupt your market, your competition, even the ability for you to be able to serve your customers with what you're serving them, completely changes. So it changes the context that your business is operating in, the market that your business is operating in, potentially the products and services that your businesses provide, as well as the operational efficiencies of being able to provide those services. So I see it slightly differently because AI and data can become a competitor to your business.
And you're obviously working with organizations at the forefront of all these topics: AI, data, technology, business imperative. You do this every day. I'm wondering, when you walk into boardrooms and you're talking with CEOs, with senior management, with business executives, and you talk about AI, how would you say did the conversation shift compared with 2 or 3 years ago when ChatGPT came out?
Oh, absolutely. It is. It's been a large shift. So first, you've seen, when ChatGPT first came out, oh great, there's this other technology that's out there. Do we? Don't we? Oh, it's a buzzword. We should adopt that, or we should do something. Let's put it in. Let's put it on our website. Because it sounds good, and let's do a little bit here and there. And then I think then when it started to really ramp up and we started to see some of the benefits of it, and how it could impact, and it started to kind of erode some of the business that they were doing. Well, suddenly, do I need to do this? Oh, and they started to spot those opportunities. Oh, we're in this macroeconomic climate that we're in, this geopolitical climate that we're in. How can I leverage this as a way of driving business benefits? So the key difference that I've seen is that it's graduated from being a tech tool or a tech project or something, that could be interesting to, to augment or accelerate, to being a business differentiator. And I think that's the key change, is that it is hitting the EBITDA, and it's when becomes a business discussion rather than a tech discussion. That's the biggest change that I've seen.
Right. And I think there is an ongoing discussion about, is this AI thing that's going on, is it a bubble? When does it really materialize in revenue? And as you suggested, it EBITDA. Do you
Yeah.
perhaps from your own work have a concrete example or two, if you can share, where an organization has adopted AI, made it part of their core business, and where they had a tangible impact on their financials?
Absolutely. So it has graduated from the days of being, boardroom curiosity into accountability, into the AI. And I think one example of that moment that I saw is a particular project that we were running that moved it from being a science project led by IT geeks directly to the P&L. So on this particular project, we went from, let's do this as a lighthouse, a little, a pilot, within the organization. And from that lighthouse, we built out a global consumer insights platform across 80 plus brands and all channels that then fed back into nearly every function of the organization. So from marketing to R&D to product portfolio optimization, pricing, inventory across markets, and so forth. You could literally see tens of millions being added to the EBITDA and the quarterly numbers. And that's when I think this organization and myself stopped thinking of AI as a tool that, that the geeks were all excited about, and started treating it really as an infrastructure to the business. So that was one moment. I think the other important moment is on the workforce side, because I think there's a lot of discussion these days about the impact of AI and what does that mean. And I see a lot of companies, rushing towards the impact of labor optimization and, those immediate wins of, you can't cut your way to glory, so they're trying to cut and rationalize and drive efficiencies, but you can't cut your way to glory. And so it's important that we also take on board the workforce side. So in one global deployment, we automated a big chunk of the routine analytical work. People were understandably anxious. This had been their jobs. And so to manage this, we felt it really imperative to look at the other side of the coin of that labor optimization. So on one hand, yes, we're looking at how do we optimize those jobs, but then we flipped it to look at, well, where and how do we redeploy skills to drive growth? So how do we make this into a really productive productivity loop of, yes, we can redirect human resources and human skills and human talents where they need to go to convert and build value and convert the impact of change itself into value in itself. So redeploy those assets where we can drive growth. 12 months later, the same team was doing more strategic, higher value work, and had internal mobility, and saw that their roles actually increased through this. That taught me a couple of things. It's not a story about AI versus the people. It's how leaders either design a transition or let it happen to people. And how do you manage that? And do you have the maturity in your organization to be able to take that view?
And if we stick with the theme of business adoption of AI as the wider part of technology for a second, you named two examples. So we have n equals 2. Let me throw some additional data at you. So there was a study conducted by McKinsey, and they evaluated that 88% of the organizations in their sample size, larger organization enterprises, using AI in at least one function. But only about a third of these organizations are actually scaling it enterprise-wide. And based on what you explained and from what you're seeing in your day-to-day work, what's causing this gap that so many organizations are stuck in pilot mode?
It's I have to smile because it's true that nearly all large organizations have AI somewhere. And to your point about McKinsey, and very few people have scaled it on an enterprise level. First, I would challenge, okay, yes, we can say that we have it somewhere or that we have it, but then how are we using it? Because people may be using it just to augment their emails. If they're using it just to rewrite their emails, you're wasting millions of dollars. So is it integrated? How have you integrated it into the business? How have you gotten it really defined against a clear value thesis? In terms of, is there a sharp link to margin or growth behind the initiatives that you're doing? Is it, have you wired it into the organization in terms of not only the processes, but also the people? Have you put the foundations in place? I mean, it's even a question before AI is, did you go into this clear-eyed and accurately estimate the data and the integration work? Instead of building models in silos or in isolation from the core systems and the processes. And that's where I think a lot of people who have rushed to implement AI then suddenly get hit with the garbage in, garbage out, quality of data, integration, governance, and the need for governance frameworks, in there, and often ignore or forget about the talent, the operating model, and how is that going to change around it. So those are some of the reasons that I see that there's a gap there between the saying that we're doing AI and really getting the enterprise scale from AI.
And if we take the other side, the other perspective of this coin, so if you think about rather the transformations that move beyond pilots and that did have an EBITDA impact that really changed the business, the leaders behind these activities, what did they do differently?
Consistently, I see that they did three things right early. So one, as you mentioned, they picked a small number of high-value lighthouse use cases that are tied to the P&L. So it could be fraud, pricing, supply chain planning, but not disconnected pilots, or not things that are so buried into the organization and into the operations that, that it will have an impact that people really don't care about, that the business really don't, it's such a marginal side impact that it's great to test and learn. I wouldn't even call that a pilot. It's a test and learn, so have you a lighthouse use case that is tied to EBITDA impact in the P&L? The second element that they did is that they designed for scale from day one. So common data platforms, reusable components, shared security, and governance is in there. So they have this spine already established within the organization to support it. And they've thought about that as part of their lighthouse use cases, and they've defined that as part of their lighthouse use cases and tested it and refined it based on those use cases in action. Three, they've framed AI as capability building and not as a one-off project. So they see this as a way of measuring impact continuously. Now, how they measure impact is also very different, not on the number of licenses that we have or the number of AI tools that we have, but the business impact and the value that it is generating from the business. I think the most successful transformations that I've seen is the ones that have adopted a view of their business in an AI world. So they start from the top of who are we? What are we doing? What are we providing? What's the value that we're providing? And then how does my organization, how do my offerings, organization, and operations need to change to be able to support that delivery at the pace of the change that we are seeing now? So recently, I think last month you saw Anthropic come out, with a whole new set of tools, which suddenly make a whole set of use cases redundant. So the pace of change is huge. So how are we also thinking about the agility that we build in terms of the organization and our organizational structure, and how do we manage this to be able to enable that agility and the flexibility of the technology and the architectures behind?
Hmm. What you said actually reminded me of something that I read online the other day, and don't hold me accountable to the precise numbers. It was again about McKinsey, and you being a former consultant, me being a consultant. The statistic was around McKinsey now has about the same number of AI agents deployed as they have employees. I was wondering at first, that sounds impressive, but from your perspective, does this KPI actually mean anything?
Unless they're measuring the business value of the output of those agents. So what are they doing, and what are they providing, and what are they producing? And one, are they able to measure that, and have they built that into the measurements? And how do they optimize those measures and metrics? You can have an agent, you can have an agent do the work that you were doing today or yesterday better, faster, cheaper, and on their own, but you'll be still getting the same results. So how have you integrated that? How have you made that workflow better? And how are you measuring the value of that workflow would be my first question to that. Two is, if you have all of those agents, one of the things in digital transformation, there's about 5 different pillars that you go up. The first base layer is that you do individual workflows. That's not a transformation. That's an individual workflow. So if you have 40,000 agents, how are you managing a multi-agent environment? How are they talking together? How are you building that data mesh or that insight mesh across agents so that you can get this view on your business? And how do they interact? And do you have the governance in place to manage 40,000 agents and the interoperability of 40,000 agents?
Well, I believe we have reasonably established that there are many organizations that are doing activities with AI. They are building projects, but there are also organizations, even larger ones, who don't have exposure to AI just yet. So if you look at these organizations that are just about to get started, what are the most common mistakes that they could avoid?
starting with the model instead of the mission. You can end up with impressive demos, but no business outcome, I think would be mistake one. Mistake two is ignoring the socio-technical system. You can automate tasks, but if you leave incentives, KPIs, the org structure, and the deployment of human judgment and human experience, you are not only leaving value on the table, but you're also you're getting a persistence in the old behaviors and where AI will be bypassed. So you need to make sure that it's integrated with the human and the organizational design that you have.
And can AI actually be the sole purpose, or is it rather you have to find a good business imperative and then maybe AI can support? Or in other words, can organizations still be successful in the future without AI if they come to the conclusion maybe it's not helpful for us?
History hasn't been kind to people who haven't adopted new tools.
Mhm.
And so I think you need to be, you need to be aware that AI is out there. You need to exercise the judgment of where and how do you leverage AI for the benefit of your business. But you are operating in this world where you have this as a new, as a new reality. It's like trying to operate in a world when, before the internet. We've been here before. You need to take on board that context. Now, some businesses are more affected, impacted, and have more opportunities with AI. Yes. Others, less, but being mindful of it and taking it into account and seeing how it will impact your business and taking that clear-eyed view of what does it actually mean and what would this actually do to my business as a start, and going through that thought process is something that everybody needs to do.
Right. Let me perhaps be a little bit provocative here. I would like to make an analogy to, well, first of all, Bitcoin. And I think based on the popularity of Bitcoin, there came the discussion of blockchain technology, and businesses were also experimenting with blockchain technology. And well, I think it's now 13 or 14 years after the emergence of this wave. Many businesses still function without using blockchain technology in any meaningful way. Is it the same with AI?
Good question. And it is a really good question. And I think you could say that about any technology evolution that, that we've had, over the past, well, certainly 30 years that I've been working. Yes, you can still operate, do the same things in the old ways. Um, you know, and so is this, I think at the heart of your question, is this a hype? And I think an element of there is, yes, it's a hype. The ones that rush to use the model and to integrate AI just because it's AI, yes, it's a hype, because you're unlikely with that mentality and that mindset to be looking at driving real value, because this is a business impact. And if you don't look at a technology and qualify and quantify it against the business impact, then it will just be a hype, shiny new thing that you've implemented in your organization. I think, on blockchain and, especially on blockchain, there are uses of things that are behind the blockchain, like smart contracts and things that have been very valuable. So I think bits of it have been integrated, there. So I think it will be picked up. Yes, there is a hype element to it where people are rushing towards it, and that will settle down. And I think as businesses have now gotten over the hump of, let's do Lighthouse, and let's look at it from a business lens, that we will see more of an integration and qualification and quantification of the value of AI and which AI, within the business. I think one of the things that we need to be aware of that is coming from AI is the pace of change. There's quite a distance between, having the internet and e-commerce, for example. And, so those distances do happen, but the pace of change of the AI capabilities and technology seems to be picking up rapidly. I was in Davos this year, and it was amusing sort of to see that, on the promenade, you had all of these businesses that were, openly hustling AI opportunities, and that's great. And I think, and that was just very much the, the feeling that everybody's like, okay, it's AI and we'll do this and we'll do that. Because it seemed like they were jumping on the fact that they're measured by quarterly value. So if we can do something that has AI, that has a quick win, fantastic. But I think ultimately, that's trying to make hay while the sun shines. It's like, okay, great. The spotlight is on here. So what are the opportunities within here? How can we make as much money from here as possible? Ultimately, that's short-term value. Ultimately, long-term value will be how do we use these and integrate these effectively into our business with the right guardrails, with the right governance, structures, with the right data, and looking at leveraging it more maturely into our businesses to be able to be effective and drive new value.
And perhaps we can use this as a segue a little bit. So if we shift from the broader landscape to really tactically execution challenges, and you've obviously led hundreds of business innovations engagements and helped organizations unlock, I think we heard it in the intro, billions of dollars in value through AI and data infrastructure enhancement. So for a leader listening, a senior manager, a CEO, or even a founder of a company who wants to move from experimentation stage to real impact, say in the next 12 to 18 months, what would a simple but realistic roadmap look like almost a playbook?
Sure. So let me break it into 4 pillars and how I would start. So one is on the value and the use case portfolio. So I would start by identifying, qualifying, and quantifying the EBITDA impact of a curated portfolio set of use cases. So these are tied to your strategic goals. They're tied to revenue. They're tied to margin. They're tied to risk, and they're tied to sustainability and the longevity of it. So, are they fit for the business? Are they attractive? Are they feasible? Rank them on the value and the time to impact, and also ladder them up in terms of what do I do first, which will support the second initiative, third, and fourth. So how do I build up that value in very measured steps and get that roadmap of initiatives? The second one is data and infrastructure. So build a secure, governed data foundation and AI platform. So common data models, access control, monitoring, integration into the core systems, that whole bedrock of plumbing that needs to go underneath AI. AI is great, but you need to fuel it with valuable data. Then that valuable data needs to be trusted. Therefore, you need to have that governance, because if you don't have trusted data going in, you cannot rely on the insights coming out. So how does that governance framework look like under there? And how are you going to monitor it, control it? Third is the operating model and talent. So how do you define the roles and the incentive structures, and who and how is this going to get integrated into your operating model? And do you have any gaps in talent there? And how do you then manage that change? And fourth is really to call it out again, because it is super important, is that governance and risk. Because that governance framework across the life cycle to map, measure, manage, and govern risks like bias, security, compliance, etc., all needs to be there so that you can keep this watertight. So it's so I'd say that those are really the 4 things. So one, diagnose, what are you doing? Where are you going? And why are you going there? And then looking at what data do you need? What AI experiences? Which of what lighthouses are you going to do in those areas? And what are the business pain points that you're going to impact? And how are you going to measure that impact? And of that AI is moving the needle. It's not, okay, it's great, it's working, but what's actually the business value? So once you've decided what those 3 to 5 lighthouse use cases look like and define those success metrics, you can then agree with the business on what good looks like. Then you can go into the design of the AI platform, the data pipelines, the guardrails, the cross-functional teams for those use cases. And when you're looking at designing that platform, and when you're looking at those particular lighthouses, one of the things that I've always found really useful to do is if you get representative lighthouses. So these are similar, these are similar use cases. I'm going to pick one. So that way I know that when I'm implementing it, then it will be easy to scale to, to the next 5, 6, 7, 8 that are similar. So how do you then, diffuse and those lighthouses afterwards and develop codified patterns and reusable components that that then are scalable in themselves.
And when we're talking about, I think it's prudent to ask this clarifying question, scaling AI in an enterprise, it's not to be understood that, okay, there's this one super big AI initiative that's going to change the whole business. It's rather a couple of key projects, almost like a portfolio of, well, first of all, individual AI projects, which over time get bigger and bigger and become more integrated in an enterprise. Is this how we should think about it?
Yes. So, I see that there's kind of 5 stages to doing a transformation. One is where people normally start is at the foundational level, where they actively automate some internal processes. Okay. That's great. That's automation. That's not transformation. Stage 2 is where individual functions or sections can start to use disruptive technologies to create a new business model. Like coming back to your blockchain, a finance manager may have heard about blockchain, and then used it to transform the way that they do intercompany accounting, but that's siloed. Then the third level is really where it's partially siloed, where the enterprise has recognized that there is a disruptive power of digital technologies for their company and for their industry, and they've defined a digital future state. And elements in the organization individually may have started rowing towards that same direction, but that's still partially siloed. Then these things start to come together. So that's when we get to stage 4, where they're kind of partially synchronized. So the digital platform or the new business model has taken root, but it's a one-time transformation. It's not in the day job. It's not in the normal run rate of the operations. And so this is great, but this will not ensure your survival. You need to be able to continuously operate and evolve and get it into your living DNA so that it becomes fully synchronized into your business and ongoing. And that way the company can maintain, leadership because they're disciplined in constantly reorganizing and driving efficiency and driving benefits throughout their business through their AI platforms, and having the monitoring and management of that and the insights into what it's doing, being able to gather that learning to continuously grow and get better. So I'd say those would be kind of the steps of moving towards making this successful.
And who is getting the organization to stage 5? Is it bottom up? Is it top down, the board, the CEO, the CIO, or do I need a chief AI officer?
I think what I've seen is that a lot of people, a lot of organizations appoint a chief AI officer. That's great, but you're also then just putting it off to the side, aren't you? You're then delegating it to one role that is a separate role to your business. Anything AI or digital has got to be integrated with your business. So it should not be hived off into a separate person, into a separate function, into a separate organization. Yes, you can have a separate organization that's looking at the technology, but it has to be integrated into your business. And too often I've seen people saying, well, yeah, we've got a chief AI officer as a type of signaling to the market that they are AI, but are they AI really? Are they adopting it really throughout their business? So my question is are you AI enabled, or are you turning into an AI, an AI enabled company?
I mean, and yet the question remains: if you're an organization and you want to get to even stage 4 in a different maturity level, how are you going to ensure that you're getting there? Because if the CEO is doing it, for example, he will be doing or she will be doing nothing else other than driving this transformation.
No, I think no. See, I mean, I think you're doing a disservice to CEOs because they do a lot, and and I think there's very few CEOs that aren't actively on a daily basis, ensuring a continual transformation of their organization. That's how they stay in business. And I think it needs to be integrated like any other, strategic business opportunity across the C-suite and adopted by the organization. It's not only top down, it's not only bottom up. The two things need to come together because for it to work, you need the bottom up to be using it. And they're also a tremendous source of value. So one of the things from my experience that we did was I had the experience of going into an organization and trying to drive an AI and data transformation. And they'd done what you'd said in terms of they'd appointed a chief AI officer. That was great. But the rest of the business, had just said, okay, that's their job. And they were ignoring, they were largely ignoring it and getting on with what they knew how to do because they're uncomfortable with change. We've delegated knowing AI to somebody else. So it was very difficult to effect a transformation because the business leaders didn't buy into it because they'd kind of outsourced it. So I went and I looked at it, and the most powerful thing we did was I got into an elevator one morning to go up to the office, and I saw that the people in the elevator were, one, distinctly younger than me. Two, they had more wearable wealth on them than you could ever imagine. I mean, they had Fitbits, they had iPhones, they had every device under the sun. And I realized, you know what? These people are tech savvy and they're curious and they want to stay on top of the game. And yet the technology that we're giving them in the organization is outdated, so they must feel so frustrated because they're using technology, which is so much better at home than they are in the office. So that's where I kind of flipped the paradigm of saying, well, let's make this bottom up. Let's engage the coalface. You're at the coalface. How would you innovate? What would you innovate to add more value here and provide them with a platform to be able to post their ideas and say, hey, these are the use cases that I see. This is the value, and put them through a framework of saying to prioritize which are good ideas versus the EBITDA uplift so that we can focus. But there you're engaging the junior levels of the organization to create this tsunami of change, leveraging their curiosity, getting them engaged in AI, leveraging their knowledge of AI and their knowledge of the business functions that they are directly working in to bring in AI innovations that are valuable for the business. This way you're getting engaged top down and bottom up into this beautiful cycle of continuous innovation within the organization, leveraging AI and data, because you're getting everybody involved and that human talent engaged. And that's where that creativity come in.
And to me, this really sounds like, well, universal truth for any transformation almost, that you need to get the right people on the bus, that this is fundamentally important for transformation to be successful, be it AI, be it data, be it technology, for any transformation, really.
Yes. Yeah. It's bread and butter. It's bread and butter for any transformation. It's having that cross-functional engagement. It's, it is the hard side of the business and the EBITDA uplift, and the harder side of the behavioral change and the engagement of the organization to be able to affect it into this lovely flywheel of productivity. And when it works well, it's a beautiful thing to behold.
And let's perhaps actually shift to what might be the most consequential dimension of AI, particularly the impact on the workforce and employment. So if we stick to what we said a second ago, and I will be provocative, a little bit provocative again, if there is a bottom-up movement and people are actually supporting AI adoption, aren't they making themselves obsolete?
This is an interesting topic. And on one hand, I would agree with you. And something came out in the news the other day that kind of concerned me, that, some of these IT tech firms and in their job adverts, they're stating, yeah, we're only interested if you're willing to work 70 to 72 hours a week, So, realizing that there is this job displacement going on, people are looking for jobs, and yet they're bringing these people on to do jobs and to build things which are ultimately going to replace people. It seems a bit, a bit harsh. But I think the reality is nuanced. We're seeing three things at once. So we're seeing that some tasks are being automated away. We're seeing that many roles are being fundamentally redesigned. and entirely new roles and industries are emerging. So we see that AI exposed sectors, fintech, professional services, and so forth, tend to see a faster productivity growth and faster job creation in AI complementary roles if you're in a knowledge intensive industry. But because currently in a business context, looking at the AI that we have now, the AI that we have now needs to be verifiable. So the more you can verify something, the more you are able to automate it. And then you are, and then you're able to, then you're able to get that benefit. When it goes beyond that guardrail of being verifiable and automatable, and then then that's where you need to bring the human into the loop. You still need human judgment here, and so, we're not at the rate where I'm looking at where we will go, which is where AI will prompt us rather than we'll prompt AI. Um, we are getting to the stage where, yes, we are making some of these roles, and a lot of these roles didn't exist 150 years ago. So these are relatively new job families, but we're seeing these roles being impacted if it can be automated. But that gives the opportunity to drive more value. And so, okay, how do I bring the human in the loop? How do I leverage human experience, and where can I leverage human experience more effectively? Or how can I augment that human experience with more information or more insights to be able to get better decision making?
So the idea is that, okay, yes, maybe there will be disruptions and shifts and changes and whatnot, but bottom line, more capable human skill will be needed, while at the same time organizations will achieve greater output with the same amount of input, human input.
So, the thing about AI and technology and AI and agents, just to get it back to the basics of what are we talking about here? They are not humans. They are not embodied. They cannot create, and they cannot certainly not automate the experience of the world that we want to have. We are humans. We are too nuanced by the uniqueness of our individual experiences and our senses, you know, that bring all of that richness that you can't get through a computer yet. Yes, this could change with with world models and things, and with the next generation growing up with this tech who are inputting their lives. So that will become finer and finer. But at the moment, you know, we still need, and I think the huge opportunity from the AI impact of job displacement is that we can actually do better jobs, and we can do jobs that we actually want to do and don't need to get done. So we can add more value. And how do we unlock that value? And I think important to that is how do we foster that human creativity and that human value, and where do we bring in human judgment and human experience into the loop to bring in the bigger picture thinking and to make the right decisions? Because the outputs from an AI agent are great, but they're only one part of the picture. You need to take that into the larger context, which at the moment we as humans can provide. And so how do we bring that in? And I think that will actually change the way that we work. So rather than us doing a task for hours and, following that process along, okay, the AI will do the task. It will start to generate that out, and it will be part of our infrastructure. It will be going through these things, and then it will prompt you. It will ask you to review, comment, edit, and approve things once it's gone through the loop. And it will be figuring out, as I think Sam Altman said this on a podcast this month, that it will be figuring out when to bother you, when not to bother you, and what decisions it can handle, and when it needs to ask you. So it will start to feed in. Okay, when do I need to have you in here, and how can I leverage your uniqueness within that loop, so that ultimately we do more valuable work. One of the other things that I think we're seeing is that is also it's fostering a creative economy, because these are new capabilities. We have, I think it's something like 10.3 or 10.8% of Gen Z graduates. Have, the unemployment rate has gone up from 4.3 to 10.8 in Gen Z graduates. And a lot of these folks are not going into corporate roles. what they are doing is they're going into entrepreneurship, they're going into the gig economy, they are creating things. And so I think it is fostering a really rich creative economy in the future and driving that kind of creativity.
It's interesting what you explained, that in the future maybe it's not us prompting the AI, but rather the AI prompting us, or to put it differently, the human in the loop. I think it's the first time that I've heard it like put this way around, but it's an interesting perspective really to take.
Yeah, I mean, as they do more, as an AI agent is running a particular workflow, it cannot, it can identify, when do I need your approval? So for example, we've had the recent release of OpenClaw, and if you've been playing around with it, it can say, okay, I want to go on holiday here, here, here. These are my criteria. Well, the approval step in there is that it will have to come, it'll come back to me saying, this is what I've laid out based on your preferences and everything else, and your availability and your schedule, and your budget, but you will have to review and approve it. And maybe, yeah, no, I want to, go to this museum or that museum, to be able to build that out. So, I think, very much they will, AI agents will start to identify when and where do they need us in the loop, and where is that value coming in, which will change the way that we work as well, because you may have, multiple AI agents working on different things. So you then have maybe more projects running in the background on the AI agentic infrastructure that you have, where you will be giving your expertise in more and more projects rather than just solely focused on delivering and implementing one project and then moving to the next.
Yeah, and based on what you said earlier, where you explained, okay, once an organization actually adopts AI, there needs to be governance around it and there needs to be maintenance around it. It seems to me that the more and more I follow the discussion around AI, that possibly a likely big area of job creation will be a human managing, overseeing, maintaining a bunch of AI agents doing various activities.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it the same way. Because, AI agents are, they're fantastic. They're fantastic workflows. They're commonly, available, and you can create one in minutes, so, yes, you can do more with less. So you can have, for example, I have a dashboard where I have a number of AI agents that are going off, and overnight and over the week, they have certain tasks that they do. And I have a dashboard where I can then see, okay, what's AI agent 1 doing versus 2 versus 3? So I've got a number of different projects going on in the background that I then check in on. And then based on the day and the progress that they're making, it helps me to structure my day, because I know that AI agent 2, who is working on the build for me, has reached this stage and these are the inputs that I need to give. AI 1, great, is continuing going on, and he may have something for me on Thursday that I need to do. So all of these things are working in tandem, and I've got my multi-agent dashboard that helps me to get that that overview and manage, where do I place my bets, where do I put my time, where do I put my effort, when and how, so that I can keep things running, which is great because then they work while I sleep.
What platform are you using for that?
It's a custom one that I've designed for that.
That sounds very, very interesting. And they are like all different solutions with OpenClaw. I think we see like a very practical evolution for people to try it themselves. But I've heard there's security is like a major issue.
Yeah, but I think there's two things. There's two examples that I would pull in, or two elements that I would pull in on OpenClaw. So one is OpenClaw, okay, and that capability, which I think is phenomenal, brilliant, but a lot of holes. Then, I don't know if you read the news last week or recently. Goldman Sachs is wiring in compliance and regulatory and risk into their AI agents. Okay, so these two things will come together. And so these things will get more secure, and businesses will start to adopt this into their businesses in terms of keeping their businesses secure, governance, track, trace, auditability, and the explainability and the responsibility of AI within their businesses. So these things will come together so that we can be more productive, creative, and secure at the same time.
That is interesting. But Amelia, I let you off track here. So if we take one step back to the workforce level, and let's really talk about an individual. So assume that you were advising, say, an ambitious mid-career professional who wants to be AI ready, I guess, but who's not necessarily an AI specialist. So what specific skills and behaviors would you tell them to invest in over the next 12 to 24 months?
Well, first, I'd say you don't need to become a machine learning engineer.
Mhm.
And I think, and I look at my colleagues who are all so proud coders, 6 to 8 months ago, so you don't need to go to that level. Certainly not now, but you do need to become extremely good at working with AI. You do need to start treating it as a colleague whose strengths and weaknesses you understand and where and how to engage that colleague. So I would really focus on four key things over the next 12 to 24 months and then continuously. One is AI literacy, understanding what AI is good at, where it fails, and how to evaluate outputs. And then and when you're seeing new capabilities come up, being able to take that lens, okay, what is it good at? Where does it fail? And what do I need to do in terms of the outputs and how do I evaluate those outputs? That'll allow you to sift through the shiny new things really kind of quickly. Two is about being comfortable with data and the basic statistics. I think coming back to your question on what do we do in this era where AI is looking at having impact, it's really looking about how do you frame questions. One of the unique things that we do with anything when you're working with an LLM is the questions that you need to ask from your experience. So, for example, last week I was looking at, I had a question about data proxies. I was working on this project. I knew that at that moment I needed to ask the question about distribution data proxies. That's my experience coming in. So that's where, look at where you're leveraging your experience and how do you frame, and how do you work together with AI that leverages your experience together with AI as a colleague and that data reasoning. System thinking and workflow design, being able to design how the work gets done and what's automated and what's not, and where do you need that human judgment, and what is your human skill that you would price at a premium. So you can look at the job that you're doing, and you can identify what can be automated and what can be impacted. Okay, that's where you're going to get challenged. So what's the uniqueness that you bring? You are human, and so what is that human experience and what is the value from that human experience that you bring in? I would say whatever you don't do is don't get brain rot. Don't rely on LLMs or, and get all of your information and rely on the outputs and not do any thinking for yourselves. Do not undervalue your experience, the depth of your experience and the experiences that you've had to be able to ask the right questions at the right time so that you can get the right insights that will drive a result. So don't undervalue your human skills. So I would say translating business problems into AI addressable use cases, I would
Mhm.
say are some of the ways that I would see people adding the highest value in an organization. Being able to design workflows where the AI does, 60 to 80% right, and we're focusing on the high value and the 20 to 40% that humans can do, and taking that lens and then holding AI accountable. That is a key role for us. How do we validate, understand the risk, and make the final call? Because we will be liable for that, um, as as it evolves. Coding is useful. Coding was useful, but you're often more valuable if you become the person who deeply understands your domain and how AI can transform it rather than becoming an engineer.
And even if you were to be required to design code, you could also use AI for this, I guess.
Vibe coding, I mean, it's simple these days with, it's speech. It's speech to text. It's, anybody can code these days. And I think if you look at what, some of the most recent Claude models were built in, some were in like 4 hours to 28 days. I mean, this is anybody can code these days, and I think everybody is.
Now, let's step back a little bit further and reflect on the bigger picture. You're obviously at the forefront, well, of one of the most significant technological and economic transformations that are happening in modern history. If you think back, how has your own thinking about AI changed or evolved over the course of your career the last 30 years?
I think earlier in my career, I thought of AI as efficiency and optimization. Now I've come to see it as institutional infrastructure. I remember when I was working way back in 2000, my dream was to have an analytical data mesh, like a fishing net that spread over the organization, that I was able to get all of these insights. It was a beautiful quantum vision, you know, and so I see this as that coming to fruition. It's an institutional infrastructure that allows me to connect, that allows me to see, to automate what's going on here and then look at the consequences that that action will have over here and bring that all together. So really, almost organically managing my organization so that it can expand and contract with the market and with challenges in as we as throughout their journeys. So for me, it shapes that infrastructure shapes also then who has power, whose data is valued, and how opportunity is distributed. I think I've become more focused not just on can we do this, but who benefits, who bears the risk, and how do we align AI with our long-term view of the business and societal outcomes? So what's the whole context for it? For me, it's a new infrastructure.
Is this related to risks as well from your perspective when we talk
Yes,
about
I mean,
society?
yes, yeah, I mean, yes, that's the whole purpose, behind UBI and my business now is that, I think, um, you know, where there's risk, there's always opportunity. Okay, I always see the flip side of everything, and the opportunity I think in there is enabling us to free up our potential. And a lot of people that are talking about AI and looking at AI are looking about at the business, the business impact and the business applications of AI. And I think there's a huge amount of potential in terms of the social applications of AI and how do we leverage AI capabilities to drive societal benefit as well and societal outcomes, and manage and monitor the risks of those of the business applications of AI towards and how they will fall on society. And so there's a lot that we can do in terms of for example, if you're gathering this data, and how are you treating that data? Is it compliant? Are you using it for the right use? So with new technologies within AI, such as, mentioned it at the start, tokenization, smart contracts, things like this, we're able to then track and trace. And so we're able to then secure it and give people the assurance of how data is used and manage and monitor the use of that data within AI models. So the use of AI is also a way that we can look at a longer term at developing longer term societal outcomes.
To what extent do you have particular concerns or almost worries about how AI is being deployed? I mean, there are those uh, doomsday ideas and people that say AI will take over humanity once AGI is being developed, which, according to who you believe, is not too far down the road. Are you worried about an AI-enabled future?
I do we have a choice? It's here. What I worry about are a few things. One is, are our institutions keeping pace to be able to support societies and the transition to an AI-enabled future? And how are we doing that? And how are we building the societal infrastructures to be able to benefit and play a role and, um, you know, and and operate in an AI future? That's the first one. Um, kind of linked to that is really the second one is the concentration of power. That, a small number of organizations controlling the most capable models, the most data, the digital infrastructure with very little transparency or accountability. So, and that links to the institutional question as well. So we're getting the changing dynamic, and I think that needs to be managed. Second, I think would be the unmanaged workforce transitions. How are we, we can show up the productivity gains in the balance sheets, but then how are we managing the broader impacts of those productivity gains? And how are we developing resilience for workers? And how are we then supporting societies when those jobs, don't, or, get lessened or get impacted? And what are we doing to trust is probably the last one. So, these models are quite opaque. We don't know how they're being used. We don't know how secure they are, and so that leads to systemic risks in the critical infrastructure in finance and public services as well. So how are we keeping pace with that? I would say that those are the three kind of 3 or 4 things that concern me most. So one is businesses are adopting it, our institutions and societies, and 2, are we doing it with trust?
Amelia, also being conscious of time, what else is there that we should have talked about that we didn't so far?
Think it's I think we've covered a lot. Um, I think the practitioners who are quietly doing the hard work of responsible AI. I think the data stewards, the product managers, the policy teams who are building the governance frameworks that enable innovation without risk. I've seen a lot of move, as I'm sure you have, from customers and clients and organizations all moving towards AI. But these people that are looking at the responsible AI and those governance structures seem to be quite quiet, and I think that's something that we shouldn't, that we should be cognizant of, because that will come back. That is where a risk lies. AI is no longer a question of if, but of how, and how you design it into your business, your career, and your society. Are choices that you will make that will compound for years. So I don't think it's not a call to action, but it's a call to agency. Is it's not to wait passively for the future of work to arrive. It's something that you co-design, at the level of your business and at the level of your own career. I think that's where I would say we have to be really cognizant about. Um, it's not blindly adopt; it is adapt.
Which then also means that responsible AI does not solely rest on the shoulders of individuals inside technological companies, but also on all our shoulders, on us who, I mean, we are using AI on a daily basis. So it means we're also responsible for using it in a way which is sustainable.
And I think it's behoven on everybody that we use it, ethically, sustainably, and responsibly, in there. And I think for the most part, we will. And the models need to be built in such a way that they do safeguard, rights, compliance, and privacy as well, and be transparent about that. And so make it easy for us to understand what are the risks that we are taking when we're engaging with one model versus the other. And I think, as you mentioned before, OpenClaw is very good at that and saying, yeah, there are risks, and this is what we're seeing. So being transparent about that and what are we doing to, enables people to manage the risks that they're taking using AI.
That's very powerful.
Where we're at.
Good. Emilia, let's wrap up our conversation for today. And we have a closing tradition on this podcast. So I'd like to ask you, can you tell us if there's someone or something that is inspiring you right now? A leader, a book, an idea, or something else that gives you a lot of intrinsic energy?
Yes, yes, there is. And And I would love to give you, I'd love to name some celebrity or key figure. I have my heroes, I love Hinton, and I could give you one of those. But I have to be honest. I'd have to say it's my dad. Um, and I think he is, both he and my son are my inspiration. My son is a political philosopher, a critical theorist, looking at the impact of AI on societies. So he's always shaped my thinking. And my dad, because if you want an example of somebody who has adapted throughout his life, he's had 3 separate careers. He refuses to retire, and he has constantly adapted and gone from very different careers 3 times so far, in his life. So, so he's really a good model for how do we, adapt to change. And I see him there now. We had a great session today on learning how to use Perplexity, and, at his age, fantastic. He's adapting. And so I'd say he has to be my inspiration, because as we're going through this pace of change, you have to keep up, and you have to change. And that's not comfortable for people. And I look at my dad, and he has done it, and he is still doing it. So I'd have to be honest and say my dad.
It's really, really, really nice. And if our audience members remember one thing from our conversation, one insight, one way of thinking differently, one action that they should take, what would you want that to be?
AI is great at getting stuff done, but it can't create the experience of the world that we want to have. That's up to us, and that's up to our creativity. And that very same experience that we are having of the world is what makes us unique. And that uniqueness is the value that we provide and difference that we provide to AI.
I think it's a very powerful closing statement.
Each of us are different. We're all made, we all respond to things in different ways. We all have had different, life experiences growing up in different countries with different reactions, and that all shapes the way that we look at everything that we do, and the decisions that we make, and the value that we can bring, and that is unique for every single person on the planet.
Yeah, I would certainly agree to this. I mean, even if I think about my own use of technology and compare it to my wife or even colleagues, we all have our own individual experiences and ways how we use it, and one way isn't better or worse than the other. I guess the old saying that many ways lead to Rome is also certainly true here.
Yeah, and I think it's great when you get together with a friend and you see how they prompt, or you can work together, with and collaborate, on a project that is AI enabled, and using these tools, and you collaborate on that, and you get their different points of view coming in. It's fantastic.
It is. Well then, Amelia, thank you very much for joining me on Business Unbound today, and thank you for this conversation.
Well, thank you.